In this recording, we'll discuss neurons and neuroglial cells. Your neurons are excitable cells. Okay? They are responsible for sending and receiving signals. These signals are going to come in the form of action potentials. And each of your neurons has three main parts. You have a cell body. Sometimes you will hear it referred to as the soma. You have dendrites, and you have an axon. Okay. The cell body is the metabolically active region. Okay. This is where you manufacture proteins that are needed for the neuron as a whole. Okay. The organelles also are responsible for biosynthetic activity. Okay. So many of the organelles that you've already learned about, we also find them in the neurons. Some of them have some new names. For example, Nissl bodies. Okay. These are rough endoplasmic reticulums, okay, which you already know are good for protein synthesis. They just have a different name here. Okay. Your Golgi apparatus, hopefully you remember that, is involved in modification and shipping of proteins. And then your good old mitochondria, okay, so ATP production. Now, your dendrites. Okay. Many of your neurons have multiple dendrites. These are short branched processes. Okay. They are responsible for receiving input from other neurons. Okay. They will take that input, they will transmit it towards the cell body, okay, where it will move down the axon next. Okay. Now, again, these input signals that we're talking about, these are electrical impulses, these are action potentials. So an action potential is going to come in through the dendrite. Okay, it's going to move through the cell body and it's going to move out of the axon. And again, many neurons will have multiple dendrites, okay, but they only have one axon. Okay. Axons are responsible for generating and conducting action potentials. Okay. So we're going to receive the information, okay, through the dendrites. We're going to move it through the cell body. And our axon, if we determine that we need to continue that action potential, we will generate and conduct it here. The axon hillock is specifically where the axon comes out of the cell body. Okay. We can have axon collaterals as well, which are branches that extend from the main axon. Telodendria are really small branches that come from the axon and the axon collaterals. Okay. And then axon terminals, sometimes you'll hear those referred to as synaptic bulbs. Axon terminals are the very, very ends of the axons themselves. Okay, so the telodendria, those will end at the axon terminals. The axon terminals are what are going to directly communicate with the target cells. Okay, so pictures are very helpful here. So all these little processes, okay, these are all dendrites. Okay. So we will be sending, or we will be receiving, excuse me, we're going to receive signals through the dendrites. They will all move through the cell body and they will move out the axon. Okay. The axon ends, boop. You'll see we branch in the telodendria, but at the very, very end, these little bulb regions, these are your terminals, your axon terminals. And notice that they are communicating directly with the target cells. Okay. In our histology picture, so our quote-unquote real picture here, okay, the cell bodies, okay, are very easy to spot, obviously. You can see all these projections, all these processes, okay, dendrites and axons. Okay. Sometimes it's kind of difficult to figure out exactly which one is the axon and which ones are the dendrites. Okay. But we only have one axon per neuron. We do have quite a few dendrites. Alright, so neurons can come in one of three varieties. We have sensory neurons, interneurons, and motor neurons. Okay, sensory neurons, sometimes you'll hear them termed afferent neurons. Okay. These conduct nerve impulses from the body. Okay, so from sensory receptors in the body, they send signals up towards your central nervous system. Okay, so the sensory information is coming from your skin, muscles, joints, even your internal organs. So remember, we are able to sense both our internal and our external environment. We talked about your somatic sensory division and your visceral sensory division. That's what we're talking about here. Okay. We have a couple of subcategories. We have interoceptors, which carry information from your internal body systems. These include taste, pressure, and pain, sensory information as well. We have exteroreceptors, which carry information involved in touch, temperature, sight, smell, and hearing. And then we have proprioceptors. These carry information about your skeletal muscles and your joints. Now, all of this sensory information, again, the sensory neurons are carrying information from the senses, okay, from the body itself, up towards your brain for processing. Okay. This leads us to our next category of interneurons. Okay, you could hear these termed associated neurons or integration neurons. It's all the same thing, okay, just lots of different names for the same thing. You only find these within your central nervous system. So you only find interneurons in your spinal cord and your brain. Okay? These are going to be involved in relaying information between your sensory neurons and your motor neurons. Okay? We'll talk more about interneurons a little bit later, but they are a category. And then we have motor neurons. Okay? Sometimes these are termed efferent neurons with an E. These conduct nerve impulses from both the interneurons and from the central nervous system to your effector organs, which, remember, your effector organs are your muscles, all three types of muscle, and your glands. Okay? Motor neurons cause muscles to contract. They cause glands to secrete. We get both the voluntary and the involuntary functions here through your motor neurons. Okay, now, because you're going to hear the afferent and the efferent terms a lot, you're going to see them a lot, okay, it's easy to kind of get them confused, okay, so a lot of times students will be like, oh, I don't remember if sensory neurons are afferent or efferent, okay. Kind of remember what's going on. You have to sense something before you can respond to it, okay, so we have to use your sensory neurons first. Okay, we send the information up to your brain, and then we have a motor output. Okay, so sensory comes first before motor, and afferent comes before efferent. Okay, so there's your little helpful hint. Sensory neurons are afferent. We have to sense things first. Your motor neurons are come later. Okay, efferent comes later in the alphabet. Okay. All right, just some pictures real quick, just to kind of show you what we're talking about here. These are sensory receptors in your skin. We're going to send information. Maybe somebody touched us. Maybe we touched something hot, something like that. We're going to send that information through our sensory neuron. Okay, that information will travel through the cell body, out the axon. We'll hop over to an interneuron. Okay. These interneurons, remember, are in your central nervous system only, so your brain and your spinal cord. Okay. We will be taking the motor responses that our brain has determined are appropriate, and we will be, again, hopping over to a motor neuron. We're going to go through the dendrite, cell body, out the axon, boop, to our skeletal muscles, and we will have some sort of skeletal motor response. So if we were, I don't know, if we had touched a hot stove, obviously our response would be to contract our skeletal muscles and snatch our hand away from the hot stove. Okay, so this is the pathway: sensory neuron, interneuron, motor response.